Hello guitar friends, Brian Porter here. We are going to be talking about installing Telecaster pickups today. Now we've done everything from a short, quick install video to a very long and involved install video, and I like to show you things that come up in the process, stuff that you might run into. We're going to get started with a base of things to look for with installing pickups in a Telecaster. We're going to be putting our Custom Tele, these are an Alnico 5, great all around, not twangy, good rock and roll kind of versatile Tele pickup set. We've got a staggered D and G pulls on the bridge pickup. A little bit more overwound bridge as well. This is a really good, again, all around set. We're going to be putting them in this classic vibe as I try to find a room to move the headstock here. We're going to put them in this classic vibe guitar. This is a kind of a B stock classic vibe. We had to do a lot of work on the frets, ends, a little bit of work on the nut. And overall, just this is maybe one of the more poor examples of the classic vibes, and I've played some really, really good ones. This one's middle of the road to lower middle of the road as far as quality, but we put a lot of work into it. It's starting to become a really cool guitar, so we are going to take the pickups out, these are actually a set we designed for Delaney guitars, and we're going to take those out and show you how we put back in the customs. Let's go over to the bench. I'm going to show you just a couple things to watch out for as we start the install. As you look at different Telecasters, there's going to be a couple different things per type. So let's take a look at those. All right, over on the bench here, a couple things to note as you get ready to dive into your Telecaster. I'm going to give you a couple things I like about Telecasters, a couple things I don't like about putting pickups in. This particular one here has the adjustment screws outside of the pickguard. Typically, you're going to see things like this where you're actually putting these screws underneath the pickguard. So if you see no screws here, that's what's happening. You're just putting them into the wood directly underneath the end of the pickguard. I like having pickguard mount. Some traditional Tele players don't like having that, but I like to be able to adjust it while the pickguard is back on the guitar. This one's easy to get to because you just pull this off and you're going into your cavity. The other thing I do like about Telecasters, you could take off this plate and do all your electronic work right here without removing the strings if you need to fix anything on this side of things. Now the thing I don't like is you have to remove the entire bridge plate. Now typically there's going to be 3 or 4 screws. They almost always come right underneath where the saddles are set, depending on where your intonation is. So you're going to run into stuff like that where you've got to kind of move your saddles. This one, it looks like we're going to have pretty good access, but as these screws come up, they're going to run into the saddles. So you may see that that's a problem as you come up to that, but you're going to have to remove the entire bridge plate to then mount your bridge pickup. In here you can see the 3 screws on the side. Now, some of this is self-explanatory, but I'm taking into account that people of all levels and abilities may be watching this video, so I might cover some stuff that's pretty straightforward for you, and that's fine. I'm going to just make sure that I have some detail in covering all of this. So again, we're going to have to take this plate off. We're going to have to take this out. We're going to have to get in here and solder in the new pickups to the switch here. So let's start opening it up and see what we have to work with. And first thing we're going to do is remove the strings. All right, first thing we've done is removed all the screws from the pickguard here. Now I should be able to lift that up. You may find that some Fenders have an overhanging fretboard, which means you may have to take the neck off to get that out, or it may slide underneath the fretboard like this. Just keep that in mind. Because this is attached to the pickguard, I can pull this out. If this was attached into the wood, I wouldn't be able to do that. It would just come out and the pickup would stay mounted to the wood underneath. So these classic vibes have room for, looks like maybe a soap bar P90 in there, which would be kind of cool to throw in sometime. And again, we've mounted this. I've got a little bit of slack here so I can pull this out and show you. We've mounted it to the pickguard like a Strat, and we've just trimmed the screws right here. So we trimmed those off just so they're not hitting into the wood. And again, that gives us kind of some height adjustability. The other thing I did, I'll put this back down. The other thing I did is loosen the outside 2 screws on this plate here. That allows me to get into the electronics. And it allows me to see really clearly which wires are coming from where. So I've got these 2 wires coming clearly from where the neck pickup is here. And then I can see the 2 wires plus the ground wire. Hopefully you can see that on the top of the camera. This is the ground wire from the actual metal plate of the bridge. So we're going to have to keep that in mind as we pull the bridge off. We're going to have to look and make sure that that ground wire is indeed contacting the underside of the metal here. So the ground wire is very important. Fender sometimes will put a little lug around one of these mounting screws on the bridge and then run that to ground, which essentially those screws would be touching the plate. We don't really do that because our mounting screws are stainless steel, which is non-conductive. So that's not actually going to ground this bridge plate. So you may have to add one of those if you're using our screws, or just use your old screws that are more conductive, and that's kind of the way Fender does it, kind of a fast method to ground everything. A lot of times, this is a very cheap guitar with all sorts of dings already, so I'm going to treat it as such, so don't be offended if I just kind of throw stuff around on it. Always a good idea to grab paper towels, though, and to set it in there. One thing I do like when working with Telecasters is I will often just turn that control plate over. If you've got enough slack, turn it over and just set it upside down in the cavity, and then that way it gives you kind of some clear room to work on it. It's sort of held in place, and you can kind of mess with it from there. Next thing we're going to do is take the actual bridge off, and we're going to kind of keep everything loose. If you want, you can replace things one at a time. So we could go ahead and just do the neck pickup, which we probably will come back to and replace that. But I want to show you what's underneath the bridge and just a couple things to watch out for there. All right, so when you're over here removing your bridge, you're going to have, again, maybe 3, maybe 4 screws. If they're underneath the saddles, you may have to take these screws and lengthen the saddle to have clear access for these screws. Always important, however you decide to remove the screws, the biggest important thing that you can watch out for is the appropriate size screwdriver bit. It's not focusing there. We'll get it back over here. Making sure that it's going to fit really tightly. The worst thing you could possibly do is strip these screws out, because these are going straight into the wood and they're very, very long. So keep that in mind as you remove this. So I've got just a very basic kind of Amazon special screwdriver here, but I went ahead and bought a very, very nice set of bits. This one has sort of a stubby end on it. So this works for bigger screws like neck screws. I can change this out. I've got a whole set of them. I think it was 10, 15 bucks on Amazon, but it's got fatter heads though that I can use for bigger screws. And then it's got smaller heads that I can use for things like mounting, pickup mounting screws, or these screws here. This one happens to be pretty set for that. So we're gonna take this off here real quick, and I'll just show you how I do that. I'm looking at the saddles here, and I'm seeing it looks like we're gonna have clarity. You may be able to kind of move them around to make sure those screws don't come out. And then I'm just gonna make sure my threads again are tight. This is a very good bit again, and also this is a very low powered screwdriver, just powered with USB, so it's never gonna get too crazy. It's just gonna be able to pull these out without sitting there by hand a million times doing that. So we're gonna take these out, and again, keeping your screws in one spot is a good idea. You do not want to lose these. I'm just going to go straight in there. Just a little bit more to go. Really, as you do something like this, you make sure you're doing what's comfortable for you. Make sure that you feel good about that. If you want to use a regular screwdriver, by all means, go for it. This is just something that we've done quite a bit, and it will save you a lot of hand tension, that is for sure. Okay, so the 4 screws are removed. Now, depending on how much slack we have, I know I did this install last time, so I've actually got quite a bit of slack. You can kind of see this wire coming in off camera here. I know that I'm going to be able to pull this up pretty high. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to back this camera out just a bit so you guys can see this a little bit better. All right, so we've got the plate here, and again, these are attached just like a regular pickguard type mounting system would be. We can see the we've got the springs under here. We use surgical tubing. Those screws are going to go straight in, and then we can also see, hopefully on the camera showing up here, just outside of the pickup route cavity here, you can see a ground wire coming in right here. So what we have done in the past is we've added that ground wire hole, something that's going to cover here, and then on the bottom of this, you can see, and hopefully it shows up in the camera, a few dull spots. That's where we've scratched this plating off so that we know we have good metal to metal contact for this ground wire. That ground wire goes to the back of the volume pot along with the ground of this pickup. So we know everything is kind of sitting where we want, and this one looks like it folded back in, so you can literally take a ground wire and just kind of have it on the surface. You can run it straight up here and just let the pressure of reattaching the bridge be your ground, but you may have to run an extra ground if in the case of like our 9T pickups, they don't have a base plate. on the bridge, so you may have to run a separate ground to your metal, which most guitars have a grounded bridge. Just be aware of that if you notice that you have a guitar that doesn't have that. So now we have everything loose. Now the biggest thing is we don't want to tip this guitar. We don't want anything like flopping over and again scratching it, but we're not worried about this because I guess with you know, Fender style guitars, the more dings they get, the more value they get. So that's the, I guess that's the relic thing. But let's start now diving into putting the new pickups in. Now that we've got everything loose, we're pretty much ready to start our plan of attack of reattaching the pickups. I'm going to go one at a time because then I can make sure that I'm basically just directly replacing that. Make sure you take a photo with your phone, have a wiring diagram next to you so you don't get lost in the process. If you're just replacing the pickups, you're really only focusing on the hot and the ground of each pickup. If you're doing a whole new wiring harness, then you're obviously going to have to pay a lot more attention to the pieces and parts of that. So let's get into this now. We're going to jump over to the neck pickup. We're just going to take this out of the pick guard. So just as simply as loosening the screws, turning them to the left is going to drop that pickup out. And I'm going to go ahead and do that while it's here. So if the pickup falls, it's going to kind of fall back into the cavity. And then we'll unsolder those connections, put the new neck pickup in first. So we'll go back with our screwdriver here, turn it to the left. You can see pickup dropping in there. I'm going to just kind of do a couple little quick triggers, and I'm not worried about it falling too far because again, it's just the cavity is very, very small right there. Okay, so our guard is pretty loose. Oh, it looks like we got just a couple more turns on this one. Let's knock that out. There we go. All right, guard is out, so now you can see everything stayed in place. We've got our surgical tubing and our old screws. Now, these ones have been cut, so we may have a few challenges remounting them in if you're using the wood-mounted screws and you want to do a pickguard mount like this. Again, as I mentioned before, just cut them off so they're not hitting the bottom of the cavity. So we have our pickup loose, and we know that that neck pickup wire is coming, the ground is going to the pot here, and the hot is going to this far lug right here. So you may decide that you want to turn the guitar around to work on it. At this point, we can kind of work on it from here. Again, highly recommend putting down some paper towels to protect your finish because it starts to get a little bit messy as you start to work through that. But this is a very clear path for the neck pickup. So I think we'll go ahead and take care of that first. Get everything fixed back down, and then we'll focus on the bridge pickup. All right, so as I'm looking at this volume pot, it's a mini volume pot. It's fine, but you may consider, again, replacing something like this, especially on a classic vibe type guitar. I have the two ground wires from the pickup, both pickups, the neck and the bridge. They're twisted together and then soldered. Hopefully you can see that there on the camera. They're twisted together and soldered to the back of that pot. So I'm going to remove those as one, and then I'm going to actually cut them to separate them. So we'll get in there with some solder. Make sure you have a little bit of solder on the tip. And if you're thinking about what soldering iron to use, we have some recommendations. You want to make sure that you're using usually at least a 40-watt soldering iron. So we have the grounds again twisted together. You can see them coming off as one. And since we're going to be pulling these pickups through a bunch of different holes into the areas, I'm going to trim those. Let me go over, grab. I'm just going to trim those. This is plenty long, so if I reinstall these pickups sometime, it's not going to be that big of a deal. I've got both of those trimmed. I'm not really worried about this because I know that the black wire from the bridge pickup is going to need to go to the ground. And then I'm going to jump over to the lug for the hot wire, which is white. Try to do this in a different angle. I always have to do kind of a non-comfortable soldering position because I want to make sure you guys can see it on the camera. So I'm going to remove that from the lug there for the hot. Now my neck pickup is free, so I can come back here. Let me move the camera back out a little bit. Again, very high budget editing here. So everything's free, but there is a access hole going from this cavity here to there. Some teles, like more modern teles, you might see the wire go down into the bridge cavity and then over, and in that case you're going to have to watch out for that. But I can just now slowly pull this out. As you can see, I'm grabbing these wires before I pull it through because I don't want them to flip down and scratch that finish. I'm just making sure they're down in there, and then very carefully pull out. Now we have our pickup removed for the neck. And when we're reinstalling, then we can kind of reverse the process, if that makes sense. So we're going to take our Custom Tele neck, the new one here, and we went with the raw nickel cover because it looks cool. I'm a fan of raw nickel in pretty much everything. And I'm going to see if we can use these existing back this camera out a little bit more so that you can see this. I'm going to see if we can just use these existing screws in here just for time's sake to show you that. I'm just going to push the spring tubing back just a little bit further, and I'm going to line this up. I want to make sure that everything is aligned the way that I want to the hole. And then this is kind of the method where you got to clamp everything down to make sure that you get it into the right spot. So all I'm going to do is get it started in that hole. I'm not really worried about alignment quite yet, but I do want to make sure that it's going to go through. So as I turn it over, I feel like it's going to have the right path right through that hole there. So I'm just going to pinch it and hold it in place, and you can see it kind of popped up that screw, and that's actually what I want because I know that I have the alignment there. So I'm not worried about pickup height right now. I'm just worried about making sure that it's in there. Everything looks like it went really well. So I'm just going to reverse the process now. I'm going to take the 2 wires from the new pickup, and I'll put this off to the side because keep in mind we cut these screws, and so those are going to scratch your finish huge if you did that. You may want to take a file and kind of flatten those out. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to run them back through that cavity, and then I'll kind of move this out of the way so that I can get to where I can reach them in there. Everything looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and take all the slack that I have on there. I'm not going to worry about cutting anything. And I'm just going to set this back down and make sure everything looks good. It's coming down nicely. I've got my wires here, so I'll come back and I'll put my cavity back, or my control plate back in the cavity upside down. Again, just a one way to do it. You could remove everything and kind of solder that way, but I'm not really going to worry about that. So at this point, I'm going to take a paper towel because I still don't want finish on this part here. So I'm going to take a paper towel and kind of just slide it underneath the side here. So that gives me a little bit of buffer for soldering. You can use an old t-shirt. I'm going to take the cloth pushback wire, push back both the hot and the ground, and then I'm going to pre-tin those leads. I want to make sure I have solder on the leads so that I can make my connections as quick as possible. So I'm going to zoom back in to the switch so you can see that. And again, I'm not going for massive editing points here. I'm just wanting to show you how this is done. So we're going to go back into our hot lug here. We remember that we had the neck pickup there. And I'm going to run that in here, and some people will add more solder. If you have good quality solder, which we had before, you should be able to reflow it and reconnect it. You may need to go back in and kind of add some. You just want to make sure that there is some good contact on that. And then it looks like we got a little fray on there. So sometimes as you pre-tin it, you may find that you need to do it a couple times to make sure you have good solder on there. So I'm going to come back in, try to hit that again. I'm shooting for just going through the middle of that lug. And then I'll slightly pull it to the side. After I got it through, I'll slightly pull it to the side to make sure there's some metal to metal contact. If you want to do like what Fender does, you can wrap it around with a screwdriver and kind of fold it around. You can desolder this joint and run a new solder. There's a bunch of different methods. For this, we're trying to get to some demos of this guitar, so we're not so worried about how it looks. We want to make sure we just have good connections and good solid solder joints. Make sure your solder joint looks shiny. That's another tip there. Okay, so now we've got the ground wire for the neck pickup. We're going to leave that untouched or unsoldered for now because we're going to go in and do the bridge pickup, and then we're going to come back and twist them together and ground those two together at the end. All right, so for the bridge pickup, it's exactly the same process. We know that we have our wire, black wire free that we had over here before. We're going to remove the hot white wire from the switch. Make sure that's heated up, and I've got it kind of folded over. So if you have that issue, just keep that in mind. Sometimes they're wrapped around. You may have to cut them off and kind of remove it. Okay, so we know that we have everything here is free because our ground wire is free here. Now I can start to slowly pull these through the cavity until everything is removed. So I'm just going to pull the whole bridge plate off with that. And then to keep it in the camera view, I'm going to go ahead and put my paper towel back down. I'm just going to hold on to it, and I'm going to remove those screws. So again, turning left is going to remove the 3 screws. I like to, on Tele bridges, I like to go kind of a few turns at a time and kind of work my way in a circle to remove those. I'm keeping my hand underneath because that pickup's going to drop right out into my hand when we're done. And it looks like we are just about free. We got a little bit more there. Okay, so I'm holding on to this. Now my pickup is free. And you can see the spring tubing. So same process, just 3 instead of 2. Got the old pickup out. We have the new pickup here. Now this one, typically we include the screws, so I'm gonna have to remove these 3 screws and I'll just use the existing screws on here. Sometimes you may find thread sizes are different between an import and a USA screw. So I'm gonna go ahead and take these 3 screws off from here. Those are just threaded through some threads in the base plate. Now I'm ready to basically repeat this process. I'm gonna go back in here. This is a very crucial alignment thing where you want to make sure that everything is kind of in that same vein, straight on. You don't want one of these screws to accidentally slip and sever one of the windings that's coming off the coil on the underside. So let me show you that before we actually put it down. You can see on this other pickup, hopefully in the camera there's 2 very, very small windings coming off either end. So we have a start over here and we have a finish over here. You want to make sure as you're putting the screws down, you don't slide them over. You're going to sever that winding and mess up your coil. So we've got everything lined up here. It looks like everything's going to go through the cavity. You want to make sure that it's not tilted too bad. And again, I'm going to give each of these just a couple quick toggles to make sure it's in. So now I know that it's threaded and everything's in there. And then I can kind of bring that up again. I'm not worried about pickup heights. We'll do that when the strings are back on. All we're trying to do here is just get the pickup in kind of a general area. That's going to obviously be too low there based on where the saddles sit because we didn't adjust those saddles. So I'll just maybe save myself a little bit of time. So then as we're tightening this, I'm turning the screwdriver to the right to raise the pickup. So anytime you're adjusting a pickup, you can think of turning to the right is going to raise it. Lefty is lower. That's the way I like to do it. Okay, new pickup is installed in here. We're ready to reverse that process again. Basically, you're just going backwards of the way that you did it before. We're going to take the 2 wires, we're going to run them through the hole in the cavity, really making sure that we're not tugging on this ground wire. We want to make sure that we're not hitting anything there. Once you feel like they're in the cavity, then you can kind of start that process of fishing them back out. So I'm going to pull them again all the way flat, and then I'm going to set this down here. And kind of as you push it down, you're going to find out where it's supposed to place. So sometimes you kind of have to find the most appropriate path of the wires. So in this case, I'm going to fold the wires underneath the pickup here to make sure that nothing gets caught, and it looks like it's going to sit back down really nice. So one thing I do like to do is as we start putting this back together, now that we know everything's in place, I want to solder everything in and do a quick tap test before I screw the bridge down and before I put the pickguard screws back in the neck. That way I know that my solder joints are good, all the audio stuff is good, then I can kind of finish screwing everything down, if that makes sense. So again, I'll change the camera angle, we'll go back over and solder in those other wires and we'll be set. All right, so now we've got our 2 ground wires hooked together. I'm going to use like a crimper like this to twist them together, and I'm going to add some solder, which I already did right before I turned the camera on. Now I've got that ready to ground, and I've got this one ready to put back into the hot location that we had here on the selector switch. Again, refer to a diagram, or you can do it one at a time and make sure everything is in there. I'm going to go ahead and solder to the old solder pool there on the back. You may have to add some more solder. You may want to, again, use the solder sucker and kind of clean it up. This particular one, like a lot of these import guitars, it's kind of a mountain of solder in a couple different locations. But we'll go ahead and put this one down first. I'm going to get some heat on the old solder joint here, and I'm going to add some more solder. This sometimes just helps it to flow a little bit better. And then I'm going to kind of press down once that solder joint melts. I'm going to press down and hold it there until it cools. And then I'm going to do the same with the hot wire into the lug here and give it a little pull. And I can use the iron to actually kind of pull it over to get some good contact there. And it looks like everything is sitting pretty nicely. You want to make sure that, again, that solder joint is nice and clean and shiny looking. You want to try to heat the metal and then let the solder heat up with that. You want to have good contact there. So everything is back together now. Let's go over to the amp, and we're going to do a quick tap test to make sure that our pickups work before we screw everything down. All right, we're over here with the guitar plugged into the amp. Again, everything is not secured down. We want to run this tap test before we actually set everything down, so you can see all the wires poking out here. We're gonna just run this through on the selector switch, just gonna go neck, middle, bridge, and do all the tests. I like to use a big fat screwdriver. Not gonna bang on this and scratch it, but I wanna hear a good sound out of that. I'm gonna go to the middle, tap both, and then the magnets obviously are going to track this, so I'm trying to make sure that it's pushed down. Then we're gonna go to the bridge, and looks like everything's working. So we are ready to put everything down, and we'll get it strung back up, and we'll see how it sounds.